think that we've understood that domestic abuse is a business issue, and most of you here want to support employees experiencing it. But obviously the other problem will be that you'll have perpetrators in the workforce, and that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, for our participants. And I'm joined by Chief People Officers Bertie, Tonks and Caroline Dunne, Danny Sadhu, Head of People and Culture, and by Joe Broadbent, who's an employment lawyer, as well as Joe Todd, the Chief Executive of the charity Respect, the gold standard I've been hearing. And we're going to discuss a case study. A woman employee approaches her manager to share that she's increasingly concerned about her relationship with her partner, who happens to work in another department in the business. She says that he's controlling her money, preventing her from seeing her friends, and has threatened to hurt her physically. She's planning to leave him and is concerned about how he might behave at work. So, Bertie, how would you approach this type of situation? You've dealt with this before, haven't you?
Yeah, I was going to get water for my colleagues here. I actually had, within my last two organisations, I had a situation where I had a perpetrator and a victim survivor in the same team. So, thank you. At Collinson, that I work at the moment, we've been doing a lot of work around supporting, putting a spotlight on the issue of domestic abuse, certainly over the last kind of 3 or 4 years. But for the last two organisations that I've worked in, we did have a situation where we had perpetrator and victim in the same team, and it was really, really challenging because the victim came forward and said, I'm suffering domestic abuse. No one's listening to me. My family aren't listening to me, nor are my friends. I don't want to go to the police because I don't want him to go to prison. I love him. I don't want him to go to prison. So where we faced was coming to the HR team or people and culture team was, what can we do about this? Now, some of my team, we're all trained to be beacons within our organisations. We're saying, well, he needs to go. We've got to get him out. We've got to call the police. Now, my view on this is we're not judge, jury and executioner on these things. We do have, like most organisations, we're highly social, and we have a lot of relationships within our organisation, people who are seeing each other, boyfriend and girlfriend, boyfriend and boyfriend, whatever it might be. So, and they go wrong. Relationships go sour. So we were not in a position to determine that the perpetrator was a perpetrator, unfortunately, sadly. We didn't have enough evidence for that. The person didn't want to go to the police. So it was on us really to carry out an investigation, to get under the skin of of the different truths that we were hearing.
Did you feel prepared, or had you run through the scenario before? Because I think people feel anxious about being presented with new situations, I guess.
Do you know what it was? We thought we were prepared because we've got Sharon's policy, we've got lots of the work that we've been doing with EIDA, we've done all the training. We'd actually dealt with quite a number of situations relating to domestic abuse, including extracting someone from their home to put them into a place of safety. But this was a new one, and it really, really did spin us out. What we had was, it wasn't just the victim and the perpetrator we were dealing with. It was the fact that the victim friends who were in the organisation were coming to us really angry. Why aren't you doing something? We've got someone here who we care about, a good person who just wants to come and earn some money, and they're facing this situation and you're not doing anything. You talk about domestic abuse, a spotlight on domestic abuse being important, but where are you when we need you the most? Conversely, strangely, we also had friends of the perpetrator who said, does anyone really know this man? He wouldn't hurt a fly. He's one of the nicest people that we know. Now, we had this was quite a negative energy that was building up within the organisation around this specific issue. Not only did they work on the team, they worked on the same shift. So one of the things that we did do, because we were really stumped, one of the things that we did do was to separate them out onto shifts, but not to give one of them the crappy shift overnight and the other one the good one. We had to share it because, again, it wasn't on us to decide who was guilty and who wasn't. We did that. We worked very closely with both of them. We gave them a lot of some counselling and coaching, conversations with myself directly as Chief People Officer. What did become really clear to me was that from the perpetrator's perspective, who eventually we did find was guilty, had no idea that his behaviours beyond the point, certainly before the point where he became aggressive, all of his actions and behaviours around coercive control and economic, tightening up the economic situation for her, making it almost impossible, he didn't have any understanding that he was actually doing anything wrong. This was actually response to her behaviour and his way of controlling that and dealing with that, because she was highly unreasonable, as he would say. It was really challenging. But we eventually, fortunately, we split them up. We gave them lots of coaching, but the survivor became increasingly really negative right across the organisation, actually. And we eventually encouraged her to go to the police, because she was getting to a point where it was creating a really, really big impact. And this poor guy, because he could have been, for all intents and purposes, who was the perpetrator, was undergoing a lot of negativity. He was getting post-it notes on his on his desk that were horrible when he'd arrive in the morning for his shift. He was getting people not talking to him. Interestingly, even the survivor, people stopped talking to the survivor, because they didn't know what transpired was that people said that he didn't know what to say. So they distanced themselves. The survivor reported to felt like she'd done something wrong because her close friends and colleagues had stopped talking to her. When actually it was just they just couldn't find the words to provide the level of support. So eventually she did report it to the police. The police couldn't find any evidence either. So again, if we're not judge, jury and executioner and the police can't find any evidence, then who are we to do that other than the point of separation, let alone dismissal? So eventually, I am pleased to say, because it brought us to a conclusion, the police contacted us and said that as an employer we should know that some evidence had been found, that some video evidence where the victim was being kicked on the floor in a car park of a supermarket by a car door. So we found we did have evidence, but without that, it was really challenging. And I know it may be easy for some people to judge and say, well, you should have listened more. We'd had all the training, all the education. I've spoken and done work with EIDA myself and people like Sharon for a long time now, but still it was so challenging for us. And I think it really brought home the fact that, and it was mentioned earlier on, whilst there are certain things that you can do, and from an intervention perspective, there are places that you can go, resources that you can tap into as an organisation, but no case is the same. And what we did do, and so this was really important, was to do a point of reflection after that. So myself and the team got together and said, what did we learn? And individually, I get a bit emotional. I'm a bit choked up talking about this because, I've got a duty of care as Chief People Officer, protect the psychological and physical safety of our people. And I felt like I'd failed in some ways. So I do get a bit choked up talking about it. But if it hadn't have been, I often come back to, what if the police didn't find the evidence? What would I have done then? Could I have labelled someone who may have been innocent? Because honestly, you'll all know yourselves, friends, family, loved ones who have relationships, things go bad. And when things go bad, and if someone's been cheated on, for example, you don't know where people go in terms of their emotions to be able to kind of pull that out and throw labels at people, particularly if it's going to cause hurt or damage. So we did come back to in our point of reflection and learning around how we could improve and do these things, deal with a situation like this better in the future. One of the key things was around the level of seniority, which we'll leave for now, but it was just to gather round heads and don't leave it to just one person in the business to be dealing with this like a business partner, to actually get multiple heads on the issue so that you're looking at this from different perspectives and challenging your decisions and assumptions.
Interesting, difficult situation, very.
It was, yeah. But it's funny how that chokes you up, really, those things, because businesses are doing great jobs. We're there to make money, but all businesses come back to talent and cash, all roads, and our people are hugely important.
And Danny, do you think? People will see. I think we have to move it on. people will see work as a refuge or kind of somewhere they can escape to. In this situation, how do you create an atmosphere where people feel they can report something, disclose something personal?
So first of all, hello everyone. My name's Danny. Really privileged to be here. My journey with this started with, so not many of you will know, I worked at Collinson for 6 years with Bertie. He's a mentor, friend of mine, and I was compelled to come on to this panel. He told me he was speaking here a couple of weeks ago, and I said I'd like to come and share my insight. When I when I was at Collinson, I was there when we started the journey with EIDA and kind of went on this kind of journey of becoming beacons and creating an inclusive culture where people felt that they could talk about this. I've since left. I've been out of Collinson for 3 years now, and I've worked at 2 organisations. So I've come from Collinson where we had created this culture. We had kind of gone on this journey. I'd been through the Beacons training, EIDA's Beacons training, and the things I've learned from it, I've actually taken to now 2 organisations since then who are not as far on this journey as we were at Collinson. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to come here was to kind of give context. And I know some of you are probably going to be in the space I'm in now, where organisations aren't as far along as Collinson was. And I think, in answer to your question, the thing that I have found to kind of start people on this journey is, first and foremost, is about thinking about creating that kind of that culture where people can actually truly talk about this stuff. And I've worked in loads of organisations, but in the 2 I've worked since Collinson, they are not anywhere nearly further along as Collinson was in terms of having these kind of conversations. People don't feel they can bring it to the workplace. There's a real kind of stigma about talking about these things. And I'm grateful for the time I spent at Collinson and the training I had, because I've been able to identify scenarios where not necessarily a perpetrator and a victim have been in the same organisation, but I look after early careers. And one of the things I learned from the training that I had, with EIDA, and obviously it was discussed on the panel beforehand, was that domestic abuse isn't just between partners. It can also be between children and their parents. And obviously looking after early careers, there are situations where we are seeing some of our young members of staff changing their behaviour, not coming in, coming up with excuses why they can't work, and we're finding out that actually they're getting abuse from their parents. And I would never have been able to spot these things, and I would never have been able to encourage my team to spot these things, even if it wasn't the training that I'd received through EIDA. So I just wanted to say that. And I would also say that when you're kind of going on this journey, you don't have to be an expert in this. It can be really scary, it can be really sensitive. I think it's really important to find a partner. And I know we're sitting here now. It's really important to find a partner that can help you on this journey. And it's something that I'm kind of investigating right now in terms of my organisation. And I think the things I've done in the last 2 organisations I've worked in is around just focusing on D&I and belonging, so creating kind of employee networks, ensuring that we're encouraging things around well-being, World Mental Health Day, Mental Health Awareness Week. All of the things you do around inclusion, D&I, will create the right environment to kind of lead you to be able to deal with this kind of subject matter. And I just think anybody who's in the people space, anybody in the D&I space, anybody in that kind of mental health well-being space, and anybody who's kind of working in an organisation and doing that positive action stuff, I think is really important, because I just don't think you can start going on this journey unless your culture and your organisation is in the right frame of mind to be able to deal with this.
And so when you joined the new organisation, had they thought about domestic abuse and had they thought about perpetrators, I guess?
No, I'm lucky now in the organisation I work in. So I work with Wavemaker in media. They are an amazing and inclusive organisation, and as inclusive as the organisation is, and the internal kind of support network we have, I don't think in certain situations they would have taken that one step further to think about domestic abuse if it wasn't for, I think, the training I've had and the conversations I've had internally with my team. So I can give you an example. We had somebody who's on our early careers community. They're absolutely an amazing talent. They're also a lead in one of our D&I networks. They're doing really well in their career. Over a period of a couple of months, they really struggled to come into work. They were kind of turning their cameras off on Teams. They were completely being different in themselves. And I've got a dedicated person in my team who looks after early careers, and they're really good at what they do. And they were able to find out that the person was having a real challenge at home. And the person in my team came back to me and explained to me what was going on, and kind of did some coaching with them, and refer them to some of our employee assistance program internally. What I did was to take it one step further with the person in my team to say, from what I hear, from what you're telling me, I think there could be some domestic abuse happening at home, and it was just purely from the fact that there was, the person in my team was saying that this person was having a problem with their dad, and whenever they were kind of staying at home, that's when the kind of incidents would increase. Cut a long story short, what we were able to find out was that actually there was abuse from the person's parent, their father specifically, and therefore we were able to use our internal assistance program to support them with domestic abuse, not just with kind of their mental well-being, but specifically with domestic abuse. We were able to get the person sessions regarding financial well-being, able to manage their money, and it led to them being able to move out and actually get their own flat, and therefore have a life separate from their father in a way that didn't kind of damage the relationship. And now they're thriving.
Oh, great.
And I don't think I'd have been able to have kind of gone down that route without this support and training that I'd had before.
Brilliant. That's a great outcome. And Caroline, just to return to the case study, thank you, Dunne, is if the situation with this perpetrator and victim survivor escalates in the workplace and she leaves her partner and he tries to talk to her at work and follows her home from work, what do you do then?
It's an incredibly complex situation, as Bertie has spoken about. And I think when we have situations where you have both the victim survivor and the perpetrator as your employee, you're in a bit of a bind in relation to your ongoing duty of care to both individuals to a certain extent, but obviously the primary situation where you have somebody coming to you explaining that they are in fear, they are telling you some things that are very problematic that are happening to them, then you have to ensure their safety. So in that situation, Emma, where somebody is saying that they are being followed, they are in fear of impact on their safety, physical or psychological, whatever it may be, you have to make sure that they are safe. And obviously, hopefully, you either have the culture within your environment and the support services within your environment as an employer to be able to do that, or you're able to signpost appropriately. And I think that's really important, that we're not all experts. We should just be able to signpost appropriately. I also think it really depends on the size of the employer in these situations. In my experience, coming from large employers, I've had those resources available to me to be able to call the security team or to call additional colleagues to be able to say, we need to do A, B, and C to support this individual, and obviously do that alongside the victim survivor who is coming to you. And Jess mentioned this earlier, ensuring that you're giving that individual power back. You're not doing these things to her to support her. You are working with her in terms of that support. But there will be many people here and broadly in our society who don't have the resources available to them to be able to do that. But therefore, signposting, calling the police, etc., to ensure safety is paramount. In relation to the perpetrator and what you have to do there, you have to be very, very careful not to exacerbate the situation. And we know that in terms of various different situations that we've had, that that you may actually trigger further harm to the victim survivor. So you have to be really careful. And that's why I say working alongside the victim survivor is absolutely imperative. Anything that you can do behind the scenes to investigate the alleged behaviour of the perpetrator is really important. But often, as you had, Bertie, in your situation, you won't have the evidence to be able to deal with that individual. But I would say what Jess said, the burden of proof that we have as employers is very different to the criminal burden of proof. And there will be other ways, potentially, in those situations where you will be able to deal with the alleged behaviour and protect your employees more broadly, not just the victim survivor, but the safety of all of your employees in those situations. So I don't have the specific answer because it is complex, Emma, but being able to appreciate the complexity as the starting point, case-by-case approach, discretion, I think is absolutely vital. And Bertie, obviously you talked about the fact that both the victim survivor and the perpetrator had people who were talking about their respective positions. What you really want to avoid in these situations is a swell of movement on either side coming to you as the HR professionals in my situation to say, why is this not being done? Because the only person who really knows how to be managing this is the victim survivor, with your support and signposting, and then also making sure that you're doing what you can do with the perpetrator, which I know Joe will come to again as well.
Well, it's a good point to go to Joe Broadbent. Thank you very much. In terms of the legal side, what are some of the things that people should think about in terms of employment law?
So I think in terms of, before you even get into this situation, you're really thinking about preparation, and we've touched on quite a lot of the sorts of things you're going to want to do already, so I'll be quite brief. Firstly, policies. Anybody who's heard me speak before will know, make sure your policies are fit for purpose, and that's your domestic abuse policy and your linked disciplinary policies. It's making sure, deal with perpetrators in those policies and make it clear that disciplinary action can result even from behaviour that takes place outside the workplace. I'd say that's really fundamental training. Not going to rehearse it, but the sorts of training I'm talking about is for line managers so that they know how to react if somebody comes to them with a concern or a complaint. It's not about being expert, it's just about knowing what that initial response is. For HR, same thing. And picking up on a point that Caroline's just mentioned, what I think HR need to have in mind is the fact that clearly if somebody comes to you with a complaint in normal circumstances of misconduct or bad behaviour in the workplace, your immediate reaction is going to say, yeah, my underlying duty is to deal with that without undue delay, and therefore I need to take action. And I think HR just need to be aware that in this sort of situation where you're talking about domestic abuse, you just need to take a bit of a step back, because what you decide appropriate action is largely going to be guided by your duty of care to the victim survivor and making sure that you don't do anything that places them in jeopardy. Third point I'd make is just bear in mind, I know many of you in the room will be from highly regulated sectors, finance, law. Just have one eye on your regulatory duties. Obviously, we've got the FCA with a real interest at the moment in non-financial misconduct, and I think that's going to have a knock-on impact. So you just need to be thinking about compliance, and in some circumstances, you may need to be working with your compliance teams in circumstances where you get a complaint.
And for an employer that's investigating allegations against somebody in their business, have you got any advice for them?
Yeah, and here I'm working on the assumption no police involvement, because the issues are going to be slightly different if you've got police involvement. And I think, again, comes back, you're going to be agreeing the position with the victim survivor before you take any action. So those are the sort of underlying principles. Your basic problem here is that you've got a tension. On one hand, you want to support your victim survivor, you want to make it very clear that you believe them, but on the other hand, as Bertie said, you've got duties to the other employee, and that is basically, your legal risk here is fundamentally going to be about, if you take action against the perpetrator, do you get an unfair dismissal claim from that person if you subsequently dismiss them? And here, what that obviously, as we all know, is about having a fair investigation and a fair procedure. And those two things are actually quite difficult to reconcile. And that's because a fair investigation really involves looking for evidence that both supports the charges that you're bringing, but also any evidence that would exonerate the employee. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But you get a complaint and your first question is, well, do we need to suspend this person? That shouldn't be automatic. Obviously, suspension isn't automatic. It's not a knee-jerk reaction. You consider, is it necessary? Might be necessary to protect the victim survivor, the person making the complaint. Might be necessary to support to protect other employees within the organisation. But before you get to the suspension point, and I'm assuming you've got a contractual right to do it, are there any alternatives? Could you move the individual to another work location, to another role temporarily? Would that address what you need to do before you get to the point of suspension? Then just sort of coming back to the investigation, as I've said, fair investigation means looking for evidence both ways, really, and I think that's Bertie's point about not being judge, jury and executioner. What I would say, two things. One, the more serious the charges, the more rigorous your investigation needs to be, and the more serious the consequences. So somebody facing dismissal and potentially in a regulated environment not being able to work in the relevant sector again going forward, the threshold for a fair investigation is higher. Is your investigator appropriate? Are they properly skilled to be able to conduct this investigation in circumstances where it may well be a he said, she said situation, sort of thing we're familiar with from sexual harassment? I'm not suggesting the two things are the same, but clearly they've got some similarities. I think the investigator needs to have that domestic abuse knowledge background, so that they can deal with the victim survivor in an appropriate way. The questioning is appropriate. They're not dealing with that investigation in a way that is going to emphasise the trauma. But secondly, I think having that awareness of how a perpetrator is likely to react, some of the manipulative characteristics that you might see, I think it's difficult for somebody to conduct a fair investigation without having that background knowledge.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Joe, Todd, can you outline a bit the work that you do at Respect and whether you work with employers?
I thought it might be useful to start off thinking about who perpetrators are, because I think maybe in our heads we've all got different images of who a perpetrator is. It's probably really important to remember how diverse they are as a group. There isn't a single demographic untouched by this. So every type of person you can think of can be a perpetrator of domestic abuse. And it is such a volume issue. We haven't got good data, unfortunately, on this from government. There are no statistics on perpetration. But I think the Met Police came out recently talking about 1 in 12 men were perpetrators, which is great that they're beginning to collect data. But that's if we're saying it's 1 in 6 women are experiencing it, you can do the maths on it. That's a large amount of your workforce are causing harm at home. Some of them are very easy to spot. They're hiding in plain sight. They're the ones that you think dodgy. And really, you should be doing something about those. Yeah. But lots of them are hidden and invisible and not in plain sight. And are charming and likeable, and you will be surprised, and it will be really difficult for you. And I think Jess said they're people we love. They are, and you will have members of your own family, and you will have members of your friendship circles who are causing harm at home. And so once we've all accepted that, I have that, everyone has that. Once we have accepted that, then we need to think about, well, what do we do? Not all of them are monsters, but some of them are. And some of what they do at home is so degrading and so despicable, it's very hard to comprehend. But there's a huge range of behaviours and a huge range of impacts. And you're not going to know when a victim discloses to you if that perpetrator is in your workforce. You may have some idea of what you think of him, but you won't know actually how much risk she's in. You won't know how much harm she's experiencing. She will tell you the tip of the iceberg of it. So I think it's really important then to have an approach that takes that all into account. I can see we haven't got much time. So you need to have, I think if you've got to a crisis point of having a case you need to deal with now and you haven't got things in place, you're in trouble. You need to get these things in place now, the policies, but your workplace culture is really important. You should be talking about this. When the policy comes out, it doesn't sit in a dusty drawer. It's actually something that you make sure your whole workforce has training. So none of your workforce can say, I didn't know that was abusive. I didn't know that behaviour was wrong. I didn't know that me controlling her money was a problem. Nobody should be able to say that, because you as an employer have made sure that they understand that it's not okay, that it's in your policy, that what they do at home can lead to their dismissal at work. So once they know all of that, then they make choices about whether to continue. So you are becoming part of a prevention package, if you like. So it's much more, it's about, your culture change work is as important as the individual work you might do with individuals in your organisation. But if you're thinking about principles for this, safety is your key principle. Do no harm is number one. And I really understand in business that it's cash and people, okay? So protecting business interests might be your chief exec's number one, your board or whoever it is that's running your organisation. That might be their number one. Actually, I would ask you to put the safety and well-being of employees at number one, because that will soon become a business interest if you don't get it right. And it will soon, there are organisations here who've probably had members of their team kill their partners because it's so prevalent. Your big organisations sitting there. So we are talking the most extreme things that can happen. So it is your business interest to make sure that you have got all of this in place. But I would also say we are at really early days of working out what a good employer response to perpetrators look like. I'd love to sit here, thank you for the nice gold standard comments, and say I've got all the answers. I don't have all the answers, and I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. So I think there's quite a lot, Susan and I have been talking for a while about wanting to work in partnership to pilot and develop what should happen around perpetrators. So if there's anyone in the audience that's interested in doing that with us, we would be really interested to kind of work out what a good response looks like. Because as I said, they're so diverse, you can get it wrong really easily. You're not the experts, you can't risk assess, you can't do all of that. I've got one little plug. We run the Respect phone line. That's for anyone who recognises that their own behaviour is a problem in some way and wants to do something about it. And that's the first step. It's respectphoneline.org.uk, and I've got the number 0808 802 4040. Lots of numbers, but also if you're worried about someone else's behaviour, you can also ring that line. And we don't use volunteers. We have very expert, skilled staff. A lot of whom, 2 of them have just celebrated their 10 years with us. They've worked with us a really long time, so they are absolute experts in working with perpetrators who are making that first step of saying, I've got a problem, I need to do something about it. So as an employer, part of the thing you can do is make sure everyone knows about that.
So employers can phone you up, just to be clear?
We don't have an employer-specific kind of staff team or anything like that. But if you're worried about someone's behaviour, they can certainly talk you through what you should be looking out for.
Brilliant.
And
Thank you. And Jo, one last thing.
Super quick, I promise. Just, we've heard a lot about there being a lot of chat within the business about these issues. Do make sure during your investigation you tell both parties that it needs to be kept confidential, because I think that will help minimise the amount of noise there is around it.
Brilliant.
And just literally 10 seconds, very, very naughtily. Honestly, don't treat domestic abuse like it's this season's new black. A big launch, a big noise around domestic abuse in your organisation is definitely needed. You have to keep the education going. Education is not about giving people signposts just to where they go when they're in trouble, but it's helping people understand, am I a victim of domestic abuse and am I a perpetrator? And that education helps people to self-realise.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, everyone.